The main light beacon is a 500,000 candle power beacon. It rotates. It's designed to be seen 23 miles at sea. This is the foghorn here. That's designed to be heard 14 miles at sea. Most lightship sailors today have tinnitus or are hard of hearing, and their hearing is badly damaged because when these foghorns went off, they had to stay below decks. But Nantucket Shoals was foggy almost half the year because you had the Gulf Stream not too far away and you had the Labrador Current coming down that collided. It used to create a lot of fog. As a result, that foghorn was going off weeks at a time.
In 1876 and the years that followed, in what has been hailed as the first historic preservation success story in New England, a group of concerned citizens saved Old South Meeting House from demolition and raised funds to preserve the building and its stories for future generations. In 2010 and the years since, Bob Mannino has done the same for the storied Nantucket Lightship. And like Old South Meeting House, the Nantucket Lightship has been designated a National Historic Landmark.
Most people do not know what lightships are. The reason being is lightships, you really didn't see them. Lightships were anchored off the coast, and a lot of them about 6 or 8 miles, and you really didn't see them. But what they are, they're floating lighthouses. And they were built and stationed where it was impractical to build permanent lighthouse structures. Lightship duty was a horrific experience, and the captain on the Nantucket Lightship had a poem he gave to us. It's, when a sailor gets to thinking he is one of the best, let him ship out on a lightship and take the acid test. And if he still feels like bragging, I don't think that all of his tales will be of deep sea sailing, but of the ship that never sails. And basically, lightships did not sail. They were anchored all the time. And the only time early lightships were built out of wood. They were towed out to their stations. Later on, they became powered. But the only time they really traveled was when they were going out to their stations. Or if they broke loose from their moorings, they had to go back to station. Lightship history starts off the coast of England. This one here, the first lightship built was the Nore, and it was called the Nore Lightship Station, and it was established in 1732. This is a wood structure. Over here, you can see there's like two baskets here. They're metal baskets, and what they did is there were just raw flames in there, and that was the first lightship, and that was marked at the entrance of the Thames River. Lightships, as I was saying, were built out of wood, and the Lightship Service in the United States started in 1820. First lightship stationed off around Chesapeake. They were about 100 feet long. They had sailing rigs on them, and the lamps on them were fueled by whale oil at the beginning, and later on they used kerosene and other fuels. But they were anchored out there. It was pretty horrific duty. I mean, they didn't have any electricity back then, of course. And like I say, most lightships were about 6 or 8 miles off the coast. This one here is Nantucket, which was established in 1854. And this Nantucket Lightship was the most remote lightship station in the world. It was anchored 100 miles off the mainland, about 50 miles southeast of Nantucket Island. And I'll get into that a little later. As you can see here, this is a crew on the lightship, and what they're doing here, the lights were actually stored inside these deck houses. This is the lamp here. This is it had 8 sides to it, and this one here, what they did is they were on a winch, and they had to winch them up into the mast. But this had to be done every time they wanted to use the lights. Now, the early lightships used 2 lamps on them. But you can see here is a deck house, and I lowered them in here, and the reason they had the deck house is to protect them. So it was a tremendous amount of work. When they lowered the lights back into the deck house, all the lamps and the chimneys on the lamps and everything had to be cleaned, refueled, and all maintained. So it was a lot of work. This is Nantucket. It was called at the beginning. Nantucket Lightship was called Nantucket New South Shoals, and this is Nantucket. This is a photograph of it. These are called day markers, and those were, they're painted red, and they're kind of bright, so ships could see them during the day. And here you can see here, there's 2 deck houses here. The first lightship sailors were actually former whalers. They were crew on whale ships. And the reason they tried to recruit the former whaler sailors is that they were used to being out at sea for long periods of time, 2-3 years at a time. Now, lightship duty, because a lot of it was kind of remote, they had to go out and they had to, they used either steam vessels to go out and get the crews, but lightships and their crews had to stay on station regardless of the weather. So sometimes they couldn't get them off, and many times, especially now, Nantucket Lightship Station, where it was so far out, these crews stayed on months at a time. And there were ships that would come out and replenish their food and water and supplies and whatnot, but sometimes in the wintertime, especially in the winter, the bad weather season, they couldn't get out there. And so it was really very isolated and treacherous duty. They got seasick, and they were subject to all kinds of storms, especially bad winter storms, especially out in Nantucket and also along the coast. In the wintertime, salt spray would form ice on the mast and the rigging. They had to go out and chop all this off during rough conditions, so it was really bad duty. Lightships later on in the 1800s, they started building them out of composite materials. They had wood sheathing on the hulls, steel frames, and then eventually they started building them out of steel. This is Ambrose Lightship here. This marked the entrance of the New York Harbor. This is kind of an illustration of a typical storm at sea with shipping traffic coming in. And also lightships, each lightship had the name of the area they were guiding ships from. Like Nantucket, it wasn't called Nantucket because of Nantucket Island, it was called Nantucket because of Nantucket Shoals. And I have a map and I'll show the shoals, but the shoals stretch about 50 miles off the elbow of the Cape. And it's a very treacherous area of water. And out where Nantucket Lightship was anchored, it was about 200 feet deep. Nantucket Shoals they're a series of sandbars and can become very shallow. It can only get to be about 10, 20 feet deep. So before they established Nantucket Lightship Station in 1854, and the reason they established it because commerce increased between Europe and the United States, and many shipwrecks were occurring on Nantucket Shoals. There were over 500 shipwrecks out there. This is Nantucket Shoals number 66. This is 1901. Nantucket Lightship actually was the first ship that used radio communications. When the Marconi radio wireless system was established or invented, they actually had placed it and set it up on this particular lightship here, and they experimented with it from 1901 to 1904. 1904 they made it permanent, and so it was the first lightship to use radio control, radio communications. This is a typical radio beacon room later on, from about 1936. This is a typical configuration of the light that's on the lightship here, as you can see, and they were heavy. These weighed almost a ton. And but these are the reflectors here. This is before they had Fresnel lenses. And this particular one here, the first ones, they didn't rotate, but this was set up so it was winched up the mast. It actually could rotate. This is sort of the evolution of the lights. This one here has some Fresnel lenses that are on the lamps. These here were first oil and then they electrified them, but once again, they were hoisted up on the mast. This is the lens on the foremast of Nantucket Lightship. This is, as you can see here, is a Fresnel lens up here. It's a 4th order lens. Just to give you an idea where Nantucket Lightship was stationed, this is, you can see here's Nantucket Island here. This is New York Harbor, and this is where Nantucket Lightship was here. This is the sinking, where the Andrea Doria sank. Nantucket Shoals kind of was off this area here. There's a chart here, and this kind of shows, it's hard to see here, but you can see Nantucket Lightship is right down here. So you can see how far out it is. And it's actually also, it's the only lightship station anchored in international waters in the world. Now the reason Nantucket Lightship actually was very important because It was the first, it was labeled as, or known as the Statue of Liberty of the Sea. And the reason being was all shipping coming in from Europe first encountered Nantucket Lightship. It was the first U.S. landmark encountered by shipping coming in from Europe. And most of it was going into New York, but once they went to Nantucket Lightship, they either went into New York, up north, or down south. As you can see here, this is the Mayflower. One of the reasons we have Plymouth Rock, or the Pilgrims established Plymouth Rock, is because when they came over from England, you can see their course here. They came over here, they ran into rough weather. We were originally heading down between the Chesapeake and the mouth of the Hudson River. And what happened was they ran into Nantucket Shoals. They didn't want to take a chance, so they turned around, came back here, and then eventually ended up over, and that's why we have Plymouth Rock today. Blame it on Nantucket Shoals. Actually, the first, originally, before Nantucket Lightship was established, they wanted to build a lighthouse tower out there. This is a lighthouse structure that's down off the Florida Keys. And the reason I show this is because this is a design they were originally intending to build out in Nantucket Shoals. What they did after all the research was done and the budgeting and the cost and the risk of the bad weather, they just scrapped the whole idea and decided to put a lightship out there. This here, some of you may be familiar with, is the wreck of the Argo Merchant, which happened in 1977. This is the worst, this has been known as the worst U.S. Coastal oil spill in the history of the United States. Now it's like number 3 after Exxon Valdez and the Gulf oil spill. But what happened was this ship was coming up from the south, heading for a Salem mast to dump off some fuel. And the ship wasn't in great shape, and the crew was not as qualified as it should have been. And it was coming up, and this ship missed Nantucket Shoals Lightship. As a result, it got wrecked on Nantucket Shoals, split up, and spilled over 7 million gallons of fuel oil. Other famous wreck was the wreck of the Andrea Doria. This is the MS Stockholm, which was coming to New York Harbor. This is the ship that actually collided in the Andrea Doria and sank the Andrea Doria. By the way, this ship is still in existence and being used today. It was refitted as a cruise ship today. This was back in 1956, the sinking of the Andrea Doria. These are some of the names. As I was saying earlier, the lightships had various names on them. And they had the name of the reefs, they had a lot of different names. Like one was called Hen and Chickens, so Hen and Chickens Lightship. Down south, there was one called Frying Pan. That ship was on protecting ships from Frying Pan Shoal. Wolf Trap, Mackinac, Savannah, Hog Island, and so on. This is a ship, Hen and Chickens. Lightships were navigational targets, and so they're very much prone to being hit. And there are several of them that were hit. And this is like a tip. This is what happened. This particular lightship here was hit from another ship. And what was supposed to happen is like any kind of a buoy. The lightships were navigational targets. Once they saw the lightships, like buoys, they're supposed to veer off in time. But sometimes because of fog, they didn't see them, or through human error, and they had bad collisions. Some of you, I don't know if some of you are familiar with over in Chelsea, you see those big salt piles that are over there? This is where those salt piles are. This is, they used to have a lighthouse, lightship depot over there, and this is the U.S. Lightship Service. This is where the salt piles are, but this is Nantucket Lightship here. They used to repair the lighthouse tenders and also buoys and so on. This is Nantucket Lightship 1936 in Chelsea. You can probably see here, some of you are familiar, this is the bridge that goes over into East Boston. Some old 4-masted schooners here. This is back in 1930. This is some of the lightships actually had like towers on them that look more like lighthouses. This one here, this is Nantucket Lightship, the 117. This is 1934. This was on station before the 112, which is the ship that we have as the museum. What happened was in 1934, the RMS Olympic, which was the sister ship to the Titanic, was coming into New York Harbor. Back then, they didn't have radar set up in ships, and there was a very thick fog. By the time the Olympic saw the Lightship, it couldn't veer off in time, very similar to what happened with the Titanic and the icebergs. And it just hit the Lightship broadside, practically cut it in half, and the Lightship sank within minutes. 7 of the 11 crew members died. And as a result, the White Star Line, the British government paid reparations to the families and also paid to have Nantucket Lightship 112 built, which is the ship that we have. This is the RMS Olympic here. This photograph was taken a month before the collision happened. This was taken from the Nantucket Lightship 117 from a crew member. It's kind of a spooky photograph. This is the ship here. It was a very majestic ship like the Titanic. It had a beautiful interiors, as you can see how well fitted out everything was and crafted. What they did was, when they built Nantucket Lightship is the largest U.S. lightship ever built. And when they built it specifically to endure the rigorous activity on Nantucket shoals. As you can see here, the ship has a double hull. It's got a ship within the ship, so if the ship was ever hit from the side, it could withstand the collision, and it has 43 watertight compartments in it. So if the ship was literally cut in half, it could still float. It's double-plated and is really built very well. The other thing was built back then, lightships were built with really good quality U.S. grade or grade steel. Many of the structures built today are built with steel that made with scrap and has a lot of impurities in it. Nantucket Lightship is 80 years old, and one of the reasons it's lasted so long is because the pure or grade steel has a lower corrosion rate. It's also a riveted constructed vessel. Each rivet, when we have tens of thousands of rivets in the ship, takes 3 people to put in one rivet, as you can see here. Whoops. There's the person with a pneumatic hammer, a holder, and then the guy that's with a forge heating up the rivets. The Nantucket Lightship was commissioned to be built in 1935, launched in 1936. This is the christening. This is the ship going down the ways. This is Nantucket Lightship originally was built with a steam engine, triple expansion steam engine. This is the ship here leaving Boston Harbor on its maiden voyage to the shoals. It was built in Wilmington, Delaware. And the ship was refitted in 1960 with diesel engines put in the ship. This is Nantucket Lightship back going out to station and passing Boston Lightship. Here you can see it over here. Smallest lightship, existing lightship is Huron. Lightships too, by the way, there was a total of 179 lightships built. The most lightships ever on station at one time was around 1910. There were 55 lightship stations all around the country. They're stationed on the East Coast. Most of them were stationed up here in the Northeast. They had them in the Gulf of Mexico, and they had them, there were only 5 stationed on the West Coast up near the Northwest, and they had them on the Great Lakes. This one here, this is the last lightship stationed on the Great Lakes, and it is a museum today. This is Swift Shore Lightship. This is right now the oldest lightship. It was built in 1904. It's currently being restored and is a museum. One of the things too, during World War II, some of the lightships had to be taken off station because of the danger of German submarine activity. Some people don't realize it, but and this map represents it. There are many ships sunk right off our coastline, the East Coast, during World War II. Each one of these dots represents a ship sunk by German submarines. Nantucket Lightship and 4 other ships were converted to examination vessels. This is a typical this is actually Swift Shore Lightship converted. What they did is they painted them gray, took the lights off, they mounted armament on the ships, and they were stationed at the entrance of major shipping ports so they can inspect vessels coming in and out. There weren't never any women stationed on lightships. Probably the closest any women got to a lightship is in this here was when Nantucket Lightship and some of the other lightships were being converted during World War II, and these ladies here are doing welding and cutting. This is Nantucket Lightship here during World War II. As you can see, You can't see it in here, but there were twin 50 caliber guns mounted on the foredeck. There's a 3-inch gun on the fantail. Now what happened, and this is from 1942 to 45. This station, the ship was reassigned to the entrance of Portland, Maine Harbor. 1945, the last German U-boat coming into American waters, the U-853, torpedoed this boat here. It's the USS Eagle 56. And the ship sank, and the Nantucket, which was called the USS Nantucket, because the Coast Guard and the Navy kind of merged together during World War II. And the Nantucket helped save some of the crew off this particular ship. This is the U-853 here. The sister ship to this vessel here is up in the Museum of Science and Industry up in Chicago. It's the U-505, which was captured during World War II. This is Nantucket Lightship here on station. This is a photograph taken from Life magazine. They did an article on the Lightship in 1946. This is a very calm day. Also, getting back to the U-853, that particular German sub escaped Portland, Maine Harbor, went down off of Point Judith, Rhode Island, and was sunk and depth charged by the Navy. Today, to this day, the ship is a grave and a memorial for the German sailors, and is actually also a scuba diving site. It's in about 130 feet of water. This is a photograph taken from the lighthouse tender that had just gone out to Nantucket Lightship during a bad storm at sea. The particular lightship here, as you can see here, these ships became, or really Nantucket Lightship became submarines almost. As you can see here, the whole weather deck of the ship is engulfed in water. The only thing sticking up is the stack here. See the flag and so on. This is a really bad storm out at the shoals. It's another bad day out at the shoals in really rough conditions. Top of mind is Hurricane Matthew right now. You're hearing a lot of hoopla about the damage and destruction the hurricane is doing. Well, as I was saying earlier, the lightships had to stay out on station regardless of the weather. And the crews. Probably Nantucket Lightship, on its 39 years on station, went through many hurricanes. Two of the worst hurricanes, Hurricane Carol and Hurricane Edna. These are hurricanes that occurred in 1954, and they were back to back. They were within a week and a half of each other. Both hurricanes produced over 100-mile-an-hour winds and seas in excess of 70, 80 feet. And what happened, that was probably the closest Nantucket Lightship ever came to sinking. The ship, what happened was the anchor broke, the ship lost, and the waves actually broke through the portholes on the bridge. And as you can see here, snapped off the wheel off the helm station here, broke through these portholes, shorted out the electrical, went down the smokestack, put out the steam boilers. Ship had no power, and what was happening was in danger of broaching because it couldn't point it correctly into the seas. By the time they got the engine started up again, they couldn't steer the ship because the rudder was so badly damaged they couldn't steer it. So what they did is they had to put down the auxiliary anchor, rode out the storm, was finally able to point correctly into the seas, and it was towed up to Boston. Boston, the reason the Lightship was in Boston, because Boston is its home port. This particular fella here, his name is Dick Arnold. It was in that photograph I had just shown you. He lives in Gloucester, and first time he came back to the Lightship was was 2 years ago, but he served on it in 1954. Nantucket Lightship also served some of the most famous ocean liners in the world. This one here is the SS United States. It's the Queen Mary. This is the Normandy. This is Nantucket Lightship. After 1960, it was refitted. They put diesels in. They changed the light configurations on it. As you can see here, this I showed you earlier. The mast is two lights over on the mast here. This is the ship on station. The main light beacon is a 500,000 candle power beacon. It rotates. It's designed to be seen 23 miles at sea. This is the foghorn here. That's designed to be heard 14 miles at sea. Most lightship sailors today have tinnitus or are hard of hearing and their hearing is badly damaged because when these foghorns went off, they had to stay below decks. And but Nantucket Shoals was foggy almost half the year, because you had the Gulf Stream not too far away and you had the Labrador Current coming down that collided. It used to create a lot of fog. As a result, that foghorn was going off weeks at a time. Lightship was also a research and reporting vessel for Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. They used to do a lot of oceanographic reporting and research on the ship, on the vessel. This person here, this is Bernie Weber. He was stationed on Nantucket Lightship 1958 to 60. I don't know if some of you are familiar with the book and the movie, The Finest Hours. The movie came out last January. He was actually awarded the Gold Life-Saving Medal for the greatest small boat rescue in the history of the Coast Guard. This is some clowning around, some of the crew members on Nantucket. One of the things they used to do too is they used to fish, there were a lot of sharks out on the Nantucket shoals, and these are some photographs that were taken from the crew members showing they used to catch up to 10 sharks over 12 feet long in a day, and they used to actually eat them, especially the mako sharks. This is Nantucket Lightship here in Oyster Bay. What we did is we learned about Nantucket Lightship. It's a National Historic Landmark. It's got a covenant on it that's signed from the Coast Guard, so it can only ever be owned by a nonprofit and used as a museum open to the general public. It's always the ship was built in '36 and decommissioned in 1975. And what happened was the various nonprofit groups had taken over the ship, and it's the most historic lightship in the world. And yet it's been the most orphaned. And what happened, the nonprofits run out of money and they just keep passing it on to another nonprofit. Last nonprofit that had it in 2008, it actually from 2000 to 2008 sat at Oyster Bay, Long Island for 8 years, just totally neglected. We learned about the ship and actually saved it from being scrapped. It was being considered being scrapped because they couldn't find any owners. This is what the ship looked like when we got it. It was in tough shape. When we were down in Oyster Bay, Long Island, we got crew members from the U.S. Coast Guard Lightship Sales Association came in from all over the country, helped us get the ship ready for towing. And these are some former lightship sailors that served on the vessel. This is a vessel being towed from Oyster Bay, towed to the Cape Cod Canal. It's coming into Boston Harbor. Put the ship in dry dock. Ship hadn't been out of the water in 20 years. And after scraping 8 tons of marine growth off the bottom, this is kind of what it looks like. You have an idea of the size of the ship. This is our marine surveyor. This is the ship. We had hauled the ship out over in Chelsea at the Fitzgerald shipyard. And did some repairs to the hull and whatnot, but we didn't have to replace any bottom plating. Even though the ship had been neglected, the steel was still in good condition. We had it all sandblasted and painted, and after painting the ship and put on the protective zinc anodes on it, this is what the ship looked like. These are the 2 mushroom anchors that kept, only one anchor is used at a time to keep the ship anchored on station. The one to the left is the auxiliary anchor. This is the crew that did the restoration at the shipyard. Ship, from the time we brought it up in 2010, we opened it up to the public, and you get a lot of visitors. Our mission's twofold. One is to restore and preserve the ship, and also to run educational programs for students and other groups that are interested in maritime history. Some people, there are some ship model kits that are out on the Nantucket. This fellow here had one, wanted to come and have his picture taken with the ship. This young fellow here had his own little model, wanted to have his picture taken. This is one of the things we're doing, because we're a 501c3, we are very dependent on donations. We don't get any government funding. All our funding comes from individuals, private foundations, corporations. This fellow here is from Sherwin-Williams. The Sherwin-Williams Paint Marine Division, Industrial Coatings Division, donated the paint for the ship. He's posing with the ship. This is after the ship was painted and restored. This fellow here served on the Nantucket, and we had a raffle, and coincidentally, his daughter had bought a raffle ticket, and they won a print. We have these prints of the Nantucket, and so we came and had his picture taken. After lightship duty had ended in 1983. Actually, technically 1985, last lightship on station was Nantucket. Because it was the most important station in the country, it was the last station to be discontinued. This is called an L&B, Large Navigational Buoy. They used these for several years. They were about 40 feet in diameter. They had a light beacon and foghorn on them. Then as navigational systems became more advanced, GPS and whatnot, they discontinued these. Now they just have buoys on station there. These are the kids. We have a lot of school groups that come on the ship. This is in the pilot house. We have Boy Scouts, Eagle Scouts. They do programs on the ship. This is a teacher over in East Boston having a class on the ship. This is in the galley. Kids waving. These are some young ladies here talking on the ship's communications. We got the ship. Nothing worked on the ship. It was a completely dead ship. And we have one volunteer. Actually, we're all volunteers, but one of our volunteers is a retired shipyard electrician and has restored most all the communications and electrical systems on the ship. We're open on Saturdays from 10 to 4 through the end of October. But we're open year long. We do special tours by appointment only. This is what the ship looks like today. It's you've probably seen it. It's berthed over in East Boston across the harbor. We've got most of the outside, the exterior restored. Now we're working on the inside. This is a view. We have probably one of the best views of the harbor from the ship. This is just the sunset. But anyways, that's pretty much the presentation. Anyone have any questions?
When you mentioned that they needed to drop the auxiliary anchor to ride out the hurricane?
Yes.
And position the boat correctly?
Yes.
Do you happen to know what that position is? Do you happen to know how it needed to be positioned?
Well, actually, they really had to rely on the currents and the waves. Naturally, when you're anchored, you're going to go in the direction of where the wind is. So they could not control the ship, so it was kind of a natural occurrence that took place. I don't know if you're familiar with being anchored on a boat when it's rough out,
Yeah, which is why I'm asking.
Yeah.
I was curious.
Yeah.
Okay,
They
thanks.
just had to rely on nature to make sure nature was pointing it directly into the seas. But yeah, that was the only alternative they had at the time because they didn't have any power. So it was either that or just be at the mercy of the waves and the seas, and for sure it would have capsized the ship.
And was it I just lost some. Was it the Nantucket that faced that, or another lightship?
There were other lightships that had, breaking anchor on station was a relatively common occurrence during rough seas. The first Nantucket Lightship, the one I showed you, that one broke anchor and ended up off the coast of Bermuda. Didn't get back to its port it took about 2 months for it to sail back. And the Nantucket, actually, one time it broke anchor and ended up off the coast of New Jersey. It broke and drifted 80 miles off station. One lightship in particular broke anchor and disappeared, and they never heard from it again. So that was, I say, it was between the risk of collisions and bad storms at seas where the anchor chains were breaking. It was anytime, if you wanted, I can give you more detailed information if anyone ever wants to come for a tour on the ship. Like I say, we're open on Saturdays 10 to 4, and I can get into more detail as to some of the things that went on during storms.
Where was the Nantucket Lightship built?
It was Pusey and Jones Shipyard in Wilmington, Delaware.
I was hoping maybe it had been built up here.
No, actually there was a couple lightships built up here. There was actually one built at the Boston Navy Yard back in the 1800s, and I think Four River Shipyard had built one. Not too many of them were built around here. A lot of them were built up in Bath, Maine, on the west coast, up in the Great Lakes, down south.
I'm wondering about the color, because most of the old photos were all black and white, obviously.
Yes.
But then I'm seeing the red with white. That theme, is that a tradition?
That was a common theme. All the lightships were painted red and had white letters on them. The black and white, you really couldn't tell. But early lightships, actually, they didn't have them standardized. So some of the lightships were painted the only lightship painted black, actually, Huron Lightship was painted black. That was the only lightship painted black at a time when everything was red. And the reason it was painted black is because the navigational markers there were black originally, so they wanted to stay in keeping with the navigational aids of the area. But the first lightships, some of them had a straw, buff painted color. But after that, in the late 1800s and on, they were painted red with white letters. And like the Coast Guard vessels are today, all the rigging, the superstructure are painted like this buff color.
You showed us the slide from World War II that showed the map of all the sunken
Yes.
German U-boats.
Yes.
Were lightships then not working for a certain period of time during World War II?
Yes, lightships that were more exposed, like Nantucket shoals, were taken off station. And there were some lightships that were kept on station that were in more protected areas, like, for example, around New England, you had a lightship in Buzzards Bay, off of Buzzards Bay, which we call Buzzards, but most of them were in 6 or 8 miles off the coast. But a lot of the lightships, many of them were taken off station. On the West Coast, you had the Japanese sinking ships there, but the Germans really had the way with a lot of merchant vessels along our East Coast. By the way, just as a point of reference, there are over 1,000 lighthouse structures built in the United States, and like I say, there are only like 55 of them on station at a time. Today, to this day, there are only 15 lightships in existence. 9 of them are museums, and we're one of the museums. We're the only lightship museum in New England. But we welcome you all to come and visit us. We'd love to give you a tour of the ship, but thank you for coming.
We protest against the whole system by which the legal existence of the wife is suspended during marriage, so that in most states she neither has a legal part in the choice of her residence, nor can she make a will, nor sue or be sued in her own name